The beast no one would touch. The war for Kelvaris did not end with cheers. It ended with silence. Not the peaceful silence of victory, not the relieved hush of survivors embracing beneath calm skies. This was a brittle, fragile quiet, the kind that comes when destruction has exhausted itself and both sides are too broken to move. Across the blackened plains, twisted metal smoldered in scattered heaps. Coalition cruisers lay torn open like gutted beasts, their hulls dripping molten alloy into cratered earth. The air tasted of ozone and ash. The twin suns of Kelvaris burned low on the horizon, staining the smoke-choked sky in bruised shades of crimson and gold. They had won. Barely. And their victory was bleeding out on a reinforced medical platform at the center of the triage field. Vareth, last Sky Sovereign of the Ember Line. Even collapsed, he dwarfed the field generators that hummed desperately around him. His scales were obsidian-edged with veins of dim red that pulsed faintly, like magma beneath cooled rock. One wing was torn nearly in half, the membrane hung in shredded ribbons. Deep fissures ran across his chest where enemy plasma cannons had punched through armor thought indestructible. Smoke rose from those wounds. Not steam. Smoke. The Coalition's finest medics stood in a cautious semicircle around him. And none stepped forward. A translucent figure shifted uneasily near the perimeter. The Selari physician, Dr. Yilrith, adjusted the diagnostic lattice hovering before her. Her delicate frills flickered pale blue distress. Core temperature exceeds safe parameters, she said quietly. Proximity without thermal shielding risks severe dermal liquefaction. A heavy, armored shape to her left let out a low click of mandibles. The Draxan bioengineer's compound eyes glinted behind polarized lenses. His blood chemistry remains unstable, he added. Foreign intrusion could trigger combustion. If introduced proteins are incompatible, we risk detonation. The towering Iridi medic, broad and stone-skinned, did not bother disguising his hesitation. And if he regains consciousness mid-procedure, he rumbled, none of us will survive long enough to complete it. No one disagreed. They were healers. They had treated imploding lungs and parasitic infestations that consumed bone from the inside. They had performed emergency surgery in vacuum suits beneath bombardment. But this was different. Vareth was not merely wounded. He was dangerous. His mere presence distorted the air. Heat shimmered along his body even in stillness. Energy crackled faintly at the fractured tips of his horns, residual power seeking release. He had been their greatest weapon hours ago. Now he was their greatest risk. Beyond the perimeter shield, Coalition soldiers gathered in uneasy clusters. Some stared in awe, others could not bring themselves to look at him at all. They remembered what he had done. They also remembered what he could do. A flicker passed across one of the dragon's eyelids. The massive golden eye beneath twitched faintly. Yilrith froze, neurological activity increasing. The Draxan shifted backward half a step. No one advanced. Across the edge of the triage field, a human watched. Lieutenant Mara Cade stood apart from the others. Her uniform sleeve was burned away from elbow to wrist. Soot streaked her cheek. Her dark hair was tied back with what looked suspiciously like medical gauze. She looked tired, not frightened. She had seen Vareth descend from the sky when the orbital cannons failed. She had watched him intercept plasma barrages meant for ground forces. She had watched him fold his immense wings around a cluster of wounded soldiers, human, Selari, Draxan alike, while artillery tore into his back. He had not hesitated. He had not calculated odds. He had chosen. Now the Coalition calculated. Mara stepped forward. The motion drew immediate attention. Lieutenant, Yilrith said sharply, maintain safe distance. He's crashing, Mara replied. The Draxan's mandibles clicked, clarify. Secondary cardiac rhythm is failing. A stunned pause followed. You possess comparative anatomy data, the Iridi demanded. No, then you speculate. Mara didn't look at them. She was listening. The dragon's breaths came ragged and uneven. Beneath the thunderous rise and fall of his chest, there was a subtle irregularity, one rhythm stuttering against another. I can hear it, she said quietly. The Draxan's head tilted. Human auditory range does not exceed Selari harmonic detection. Good thing I'm not Selari. She stepped closer to the platform. Heat struck her first, a furnace wind that dried her eyes and prickled her exposed skin. The air shimmered violently near his wounds. Lieutenant, Yilrith warned. Mara ignored hers. She placed one gloved hand against a scale near Vareth's shoulder. It was like touching a sun-warmed boulder. Underneath, faint but distinct, something faltered. Once, twice, a pause too long. He has two primary circulatory cores, she said, voice steady. Left one's compensating, it won't hold much longer. How could you possibly? Because I've treated double ventricle collapse before. The Draxon's lenses flickered, in dragons. In humans. Silence fell. Yilrith's frills dimmed further. You extrapolate from incomplete data. I act because he saved my unit, Mara said. Her gaze lifted briefly to meet theirs. And because none of you are. That struck deeper than accusation. It was a simple truth. Another flicker beneath the dragon's eyelid. The massive golden eye opened. The effect was immediate. Several medics flinched back as if struck. The pupil narrowed against the lights, molten gold reflecting the triage field in miniature. Smoke curled from serrated nostrils. A faint growl vibrated through the platform beneath Mara's boots. Even wounded, he radiated power. Predatory, ancient, terrifying. The Draxon guards beyond the barrier raised their weapons instinctively. Mara stepped fully into the dragon's field of vision. Easy, she said softly. The breath that washed over her was scorching. The ends of her hair curled slightly from the heat. Behind her, someone whispered, withdraw. She did not. You remember the ridge, she murmured. You shielded us. The golden eye focused. Recognition is difficult to quantify across species. But something changed. The tension did not vanish, but it shifted. The eyelid lowered halfway. The low growl subsided into something quieter. Mara exhaled slowly. That's it. She turned back toward the coalition medics. I need reactor-grade coolant gel, she said, and your nano-stitcher. The Draxon blinked. The nano-stitcher cannot penetrate his scale density. I'm not going through them, she replied. I'm going between. Yilrith stared at her. The interscale gap averages less than 3 centimeters. Then I won't miss. She climbed onto the hovering medical platform. Up close, the damage was worse. Fissures spiderwebbed across Vareth's chest, glowing faintly at their edges. Blackened plasma scoring marred once polished scale. Beneath the largest fracture, internal heat pulsed violently. Mara knelt carefully, bracing one knee against a ridge of hardened armor. Stay with me, she whispered. The dragon's eye tracked her movements. He did not strike. She injected coolant gel directly into a seam between scales. For a split second, nothing happened. Then Vareth convulsed. A shockwave of energy rippled outward, rattling equipment and forcing several medics to stumble. The platform groaned under sudden strain. Stabilize field output, Yilrith shouted. Mara gripped the scale ridge and held on. Temperature dropping 0.2%, she called. He's responding. The Draxon's monitor flashed rapidly, cellular thermal variance decreasing. The dragon's growl rose into a roar. It tore through the triage field like thunder splitting stone. Several soldiers dropped to their knees. A containment shield flickered dangerously. Pain, raw and immense. But Mara did not withdraw the injector. Almost there, she muttered. She pulled a sealed cartridge from her kit. Synthetic plasma, human-engineered for extreme trauma stabilization. Yilrith's frills flared in alarm. Foreign plasma introduction could. I know. She met the dragon's golden gaze. This is going to hurt. The eye did not close. She inserted the transfusion line. 1 heartbeat. 2. The roar that followed shook the sky. But beneath it, the erratic rhythm under her palm steadied. Once, twice, then strong. The second core reignited. Energy surged, but it flowed inward, stabilizing rather than exploding outward. Monitors leveled. The roar faded into a deep, resonant rumble. He's stabilizing, the Draxon breathed. Yilrith stared at her readings in disbelief, core systems resynchronizing. Mara sagged slightly, exhaustion finally creeping in. She rested her hand against the warm, living armor. Welcome back, she whispered. The golden eye studied her. Not as predator, not as prey, as something else. The triage field remained silent long after the immediate crisis passed. They had all watched, all hesitated, and one human had stepped forward. Not because it was safe, because it was right. Beyond the shield, coalition soldiers began to murmur. Fear had not vanished, but it had shifted. Vareth breathed more evenly now, each exhale released less smoke. The war had ended in silence. But something new had begun here, in heat and risk and stubborn defiance. Ylrith approached cautiously, stopping several meters from the dragon's head. You risked annihilation, she said softly to Mara. Mara didn't look away from the golden eyes. Yeah, she replied. Ylrith studied the readings one more time. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped closer. Not within striking distance, but closer than before. The Draxen followed. Then the Erides. No one spoke of courage. No one mentioned fear. They simply began preparing the next stage of treatment. Because the terrifying dragon was no longer an untouchable weapon. He was a patient. And he was alive. Thanks to the one species small enough, fragile enough, and stubborn enough to step forward when everyone else stepped back. The dragon's eye drifted half-closed as stabilization deepened. But before sleep claimed him fully, his gaze returned to the human one last time. And in that molten gold there was something unmistakable. Recognition. Not of power, of choice. And the coalition, watching from a distance once defined by fear, felt the first crack in something far older than war begin to break. Fire learns a name. Vareth did not sleep the way other beings slept. When the sedation field lowered and the last of the emergency stabilizers were withdrawn, the dragon's body entered a state the Cellari classified as regenerative stasis, cellular repair accelerated by internal thermal cycling. To most species, it looked like unconsciousness. Mara Cade knew better. She had spent too many nights beside trauma patients to mistake stillness for absence. The triage field had been reinforced since the day she restarted the dragon's secondary heart. What began as a battlefield medical zone now resembled a hybrid between a starship hangar and a containment vault. Energy anchors lined the perimeter, not to imprison, the coalition insisted, but to mitigate unforeseen surges. Fear rarely calls itself fear. It prefers technical language. Dr. Ylrith hovered near a floating diagnostic array, her translucent form shimmering faintly green, cautious optimism. Thermal flux cycling within predicted recovery range, she reported, wing membrane regrowth at 22%. A Draxen technician adjusted a hovering drone, bone lattice density reconstituting, fascinating structure, self-fusing crystalline matrix. Across the chamber, two Iridi guards stood at attention, no longer aiming weapons but still armed. Mara sat cross-legged near Vareth's massive skull. She had been ordered to rest twice. She had ignored it twice. Her boots were off, one sock had a hole near the heel. Her uniform sleeve was now patched with medical tape, a cup of something that claimed to be coffee cooled beside her. She watched the dragon's breathing. Deep, slow, but not mindless. You're listening, she murmured. The nearest Iridi guard stiffened. Lieutenant, he remains in stasis. Mara didn't glance back. You ever pretended to sleep when you didn't want to talk? The guard hesitated. That is not tactically relevant. Sure it is. A faint vibration passed beneath her palm, where it rested against a scale ridge near Vareth's jaw. Small, but deliberate. Ylrith noticed, neurological spike detected. Mara smiled faintly, told you. The dragon's eyelid lifted. Slowly, molten gold reflected the medical lights. Several personnel froze automatically. Old reflexes die hard. Vareth did not rise. He did not roar. He simply looked. His gaze traveled across the chamber, lingering briefly on the Iridi guards, then the Draxen technician, then the Cellari physician. Each stiffened under that ancient, assessing stare. Finally, his eyes settled on Mara. The air temperature ticked up 0.5 degree. Mara leaned forward slightly. Morning, she said. A faint plume of smoke curled from his nostrils. Ylrith adjusted her instruments, core stability holds. The Draxon whispered he is fully conscious. Mara stood slowly, keeping movements unhurried. You're safe, she told Vareth quietly. No one's shooting at you. The dragon's pupil narrowed. Not in aggression. In focus. He shifted slightly. The ground trembled under the movement of one massive forelimb. Weapons were not raised this time. But hands hovered close. Vareth's claw flexed experimentally. The talons were longer than Mara's entire arm. He lifted the limb a few inches. Testing. The energy anchors hummed faintly in response. His eye flicked toward them. Mara followed his gaze. They're nervous, she admitted. You kind of melted a fleet. A low rumble vibrated through the chamber. Not anger. It's memory. She stepped closer, ignoring the subtle intake of breath from the Iridi guards. You don't have to prove anything, she said softly. Vareth's claw lowered again. The anchor's hum diminished. Ylrith's frills brightened slightly. Behavioral compliance improving, the Selari murmured. Mara snorted. He's not a malfunctioning reactor, Doc. He is a being of extraordinary destructive capacity. Yeah, Mara agreed, and he's choosing not to use it. That word choosing hung heavy in the air. The Coalition had relied on Vareth's power in battle. But they had never truly considered his agency. The Draxon technician cleared his throat sacs, wing membrane regeneration sufficient for minor extension testing. Every eye shifted to the dragon. Vareth's gaze remained on Mara. She tilted her head slightly, slow. He unfolded one wing. The sound was like a storm front cracking open. Membrane stretched, still partially translucent from regrowth. Light filtered through crimson veins as he extended it cautiously. The nearest equipment rattled. One Iridi guard took an involuntary step back. Vareth noticed. His wing paused mid-extension. Mara saw the shift in his posture. It's okay, she said quietly, they're just loud breathers. A faint huff escaped the dragon, almost amused. He completed the extension carefully, deliberately avoiding nearby equipment. The Draxon's instruments beeped excitedly, structural integrity within acceptable variance. Vareth folded the wing again without incident. A subtle shift rippled through the chamber. Tension still present had thinned. The terrifying dragon had moved. And nothing burned. Later that cycle, the Coalition Council reconvened. Holographic projections shimmered above a circular command table. Admiral Koth of the Iridi presided, massive and immovable. The dragon's recovery accelerates, Koth began. Strategic implications must be evaluated. A Draxon representative clicked sharply. Asset classification remains unresolved. Mara stood at the edge of the chamber, arms crossed. He's not an asset. He is a singular war entity, the Draxon countered, capable of altering power balance across sectors. And he's sitting in a medical bay eating nutrient paste, Mara replied. Murmurs rippled through the projections. Ylrith's image shimmered. Lieutenant Cade maintains unique rapport. Removal of her proximity may destabilize recovery. Koth studied Mara. Are you prepared to assume ongoing liaison responsibility? Mara raised an eyebrow. Is that a fancy way of saying babysitter? It is a formal recognition of influence. Well, she sighed. He's not a bomb you defuse by hovering nearby. Then what is he? The Draxon demanded. Mara paused. A soldier, she said finally, one who's been fighting alone a long time. Silence followed. The Selari representative spoke softly. Loneliness alters cognition across species. Yes, Mara said, it does. Back in the recovery chamber, Vareth tested standing. The first attempt nearly collapsed the platform. Even with reinforced gravitic supports, his weight strained the system. He pushed up slowly, claws scraping against the alloy floor. Mara stood nearby, not touching, not commanding, simply present. Easy, she murmured. Vareth rose to half height. His wings unfurled slightly for balance. The chamber suddenly felt far too small. Heat radiated from his body in waves. But he did not lash out. He did not roar. He stood. The Iridi guards remained steady this time. One even lowered his chin slightly in what might have been respect. Vareth's golden gaze drifted across the room again. He was measuring, assessing. Mara stepped closer to his shoulder. "You don't have to stay here," she said quietly. His eye flicked toward her. "You could leave, skies open." A long pause. He tilted his head slightly. The motion conveyed a question. "You don't owe them," she clarified. A low resonance vibrated through the air. Not sound exactly. More like pressure shifting inside her chest. Alone, the impression hit her with surprising force. She swallowed. "Yeah," she said softly, "I know that one." The resonance shifted. "Not alone." Her breath caught. Ylrith's instruments flickered wildly. "Electromagnetic fluctuation spike," she whispered. Mara didn't move. She stepped closer until she could rest her palm against the dragon's chest, between two scales still faintly cracked from battle. "Guess we fixed that," she murmured. Vareth lowered his head slightly. "Not submissive. Not dominant. Aligned." The following days transformed the chamber. Medical staff rotated in closer shifts. The Draxan technician, once rigid with fear, now adjusted coolant regulators within arm's reach of a folded wing. A Cellari nurse replaced a membrane support brace without trembling. The Aridi guards stood easier. Trust did not arrive all at once. It accumulated, one non-roar at a time. Then came the test. A refugee transport descended unexpectedly early, damaged from debris collision. Its guidance system malfunctioned, sending it spiraling toward the Coalition encampment. Alarms blared. "Impact trajectory intersects medical sector," someone shouted. The transport's engines sputtered, flames trailing from one wing. Vareth reacted before command could. He moved, not with the explosive violence of battle, but with terrifying speed nonetheless. He surged upward, wings snapping open fully for the first time since injury. The shockwave flattened tents across the perimeter. Mara barely had time to grab onto a support beam. Vareth launched skyward. The transport screamed toward the ground. He intercepted it mid-descent. Claws wrapped around the hull carefully, precisely. Metal groaned but did not crumple. He beat his wings once, twice, slowing the descent. Then redirected. He carried the failing ship away from the encampment and lowered it gently beyond the outer ridge. When he returned, smoke curled from his wingtips, but no wreckage followed. Silence blanketed the field. Refugees began emerging from the damaged transport, alive. A Cellari child pointed upward. "That is the Fire Guardian," she whispered. The phrase spread. Fire Guardians. Not war beast. Not weapons. Guardians. Vareth landed near the perimeter instead of inside the medical bay. He folded his wings carefully. Mara approached him, heart still hammering. "You could have torn it apart," she said. His golden eye studied her. A low rumble vibrated, not pride. "Certainty." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured." Across the encampment, Coalition members watched openly now. No flinching. No weapons raised. The terrifying dragon who once inspired paralysis had chosen restraint. Chosen protection. Chosen them. Admiral Koth observed from a command balcony. "Record this," he ordered quietly. Ylrith stood beside him. "Behavioral classification update," Koth asked. The Cellari's frills glowed a bright, steady green. "Not classification," she corrected gently. "Recognition." Back below, Mara leaned lightly against Vareth's foreleg. "You're changing things," she said softly. He exhaled warm air that ruffled her hair but did not scorch it. The air between them felt different now. Less volatile. More certain. In the days that followed, Vareth no longer remained confined to the chamber. He moved along the encampment's outer edge. Always facing outward. Always watching the horizon. Soldiers worked beneath his shadow. Refugees slept more easily knowing something vast and terrible stood guard. And always somewhere nearby. A human walked beside him. The Coalition had once feared what fire could destroy. Now they began to understand what it could protect. And it had started the moment one stubborn, fragile species stepped forward instead of back. Fire had learned a name, and it answered. When the sky answered back, the sky above Kelvaris had finally begun to look like a sky again. For weeks after the war, it had been a ceiling of ash choked with debris, streaked with orbital fire, haunted by the drifting carcasses of ships that would never fly again. But time, stubborn and indifferent, had pushed the smoke aside. Blue returned in hesitant stretches. The twin suns no longer burned red through soot, but gold through open air. Reconstruction began in layers. First came survival, water filtration units, emergency shelters, power relays strung together like fragile veins across broken ground. Then came permanence, reinforced habitation domes, landing platforms, supply corridors. And at the far edge of it all, where the city met the still-scarred plains, something vast and dark stood watch. Vareth no longer remained within reinforced containment fields. He chose the perimeter. Always the perimeter. He positioned himself where horizon met Earth, wings partially folded but never fully at rest, golden eyes scanning distances no conventional sensor could match. From afar, he looked like a living fortress, obsidian scales catching sunlight, faint veins of ember light pooling beneath them like a contained star. Up close, he was something else. Measured, still, listening. Mara Cade walked the line beneath him. She had been reassigned 3 times in official documentation: combat medic, interspecies liaison, strategic advisory asset. She ignored the titles. She carried her dented medical kit and wore the same patched uniform sleeve. She still tied her hair back with gauze when she forgot proper bands. And every morning, she walked the perimeter with a dragon. "You know they're calling you something now," she said one dawn, hands tucked into jacket pockets as the suns crested low ridges. Vareth's gaze did not leave the horizon. A faint plume of smoke drifted from his nostrils. "Fire Guardian," she continued. "Solari started it. Draxon pretend they didn't copy them." A rumble vibrated faintly in the air. Amusement. She tilted her head up at him. Better than unstable war entity, right? His wings shifted slightly, casting a longer shadow across her path. She took that as agreement. Behind them, the encampment stirred awake. Refugee children chased one another between supply crates. Draxon engineers calibrated atmospheric stabilizers. Solari medics adjusted portable gardens designed to restore soil nutrients. No one screamed when Vareth moved. No one reached for weapons when his wings flexed. Fear had not vanished entirely. It had evolved. It had become respect. But peace is fragile, and enemies do not always retreat when battles end. The warning came as a distortion, barely perceptible to standard sensors. A fluctuation in upper atmospheric particulate patterns. A shift in electromagnetic resonance. Coalition detection grids hesitated, uncertain. Vareth did not. His head snapped upward. Golden eyes narrowed. The air around him thickened, heat rising instantly along his spine. Mara saw the change before alarm sounded. "What is it?" she asked quietly. A deep vibration rolled from his chest, not loud but intense. "Threat. Distant. Approaching." Seconds later, sirens wailed across the encampment. Unidentified vessels exiting suborbital drift, a voice barked over comms, vectoring toward civilian sector. Panics threatened to ripple outward. Vareth moved before panic could solidify. He stepped forward, wings unfurling in a rush of displaced air that sent dust spiraling. Mara braced against the gust. "Vareth waits." He launched. The takeoff cracked like thunder. Shockwaves rattled windows across the camp. Children stumbled, only to be steadied by soldiers already looking skyward. 3-strike craft tore through the upper atmosphere, sleek, predatory silhouettes painted in the colors of a fractured enemy faction unwilling to accept defeat. They had not come for a military target. They had come for refugees. Missile bays opened. Target locks chirped. Below, anti-air batteries scrambled to calibrate. Too slow. Vareth climbed higher. The sky seemed to darken around him as he ascended, heat trails carving crimson lines through blue. The first missile launched. Then the second. Then a volley. They streaked downward toward the civilian quarter. Mara watched, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. "Come on," she whispered. Vareth folded his wings and dove. The descent was terrifying in its precision. He intercepted the first missile mid-flight. It detonated against his chest in a bloom of white fire. The explosion swallowed him. Gasps rippled through the encampment. For a heartbeat, he vanished. Then he burst through the smoke, scales scorched but intact. He exhaled not flame yet but concentrated heat, disrupting the trajectory of two incoming missiles, forcing them wide. The third streaked past him. Too fast. Mara saw it. "Left flank," she shouted instinctively, though she knew he couldn't hear her over atmospheric roar. He adjusted midair impossibly. A wing snapped out, catching turbulence, altering his descent angle by mere degrees. It was enough. He twisted, talons snapping around the missile's hull. He crushed it before detonation. Shrapnel scattered harmlessly across open plains. The strike craft attempted evasive maneuvers. Vareth did not pursue recklessly. He positioned himself between them and the encampment. Guarding, one craft fired plasma cannons. Blazing arcs slammed into his wings. The regrown membrane tore. He roared, not in pains, in warnings. And this time, he answered with fire. Not the wild inferno of battles. Not the all-consuming blaze that melts fleets. A focused stream white-hot and precise. It sliced through the lead strike craft's engine array. The vessel spiraled powerless, crashing far beyond civilian range. The remaining two broke formation. They had expected a wounded beast. They encountered a guardians. They fled. Vareth did not chase. He hovered briefly, ensuring retreat vectors pointed away from Kelvaris. Then he descended. The landing shook the ground. He touched down at the edge of the refugee quarter, wings partially spread as if shielding unseen danger. Smoke curled from fresh wounds along his flank. Mara ran toward him before medics could issue warnings. She didn't stop until she stood beneath his lowered head. "You idiot," she breathed, voice breaking despite herself. "You absolute magnificent idiot." His golden eye focused on her. The intensity in it softened. A low resonance vibrated, not alone. Her throat tightened. "I know," she whispered. Coalition medics approached without hesitation this time. Ylrith stepped forward first, instruments already active. "Surface plasma scoring," she reported calmly, membrane tier reopened. A Draxan engineer deployed coolant drones. Iridi guards formed a protective perimeter, not around themselves. Around him, no weapons aimed. Only readiness. Mara pressed her palm against a scorched scale. "You didn't have to intercept that close." A faint rumble answered. She understood. He had not intercepted for glory. He had intercepted because there had been no margin for error. Later in the command chamber, Admiral Koth's projection loomed over tactical data. "Enemy remnants confirmed," he said gravely. "Retaliatory strike patterns probable." The Draxan representative clicked sharply. "We must relocate the dragon to fortified command structures." Mara stood across from them, arms folded. "He won't agree." "Agreement is irrelevant," the Draxan snapped. "Strategic preservation. He's not equipment you store in a bunker." Koth's gaze shifted to her. "Lieutenant Cade, can you guarantee his continued alignment with coalition interests?" She met the Admiral's stare evenly. "No." A ripple of discomfort moved through the chamber. "But I can guarantee this," she continued. "He won't abandon civilians to save himself." Silence. Ylrith's projection flickered softly. Behavioral modeling supports Lieutenant Cade's assertion. Koth inclined his head slowly. "Then we adapt strategy accordingly." Back at the perimeter, Vareth stood once more facing outward. Fresh bandaging reinforced wing membranes. Coolant residue glistened along scorched scales. He looked no less terrifying. But something had changed in how others saw him. Refugees approached cautiously, not fleeing but curious. A Siluri child stepped forward, clutching a small metallic object. Mara noticed first. She crouched beside the child. "It's okay," she murmured. The child swallowed and held up the object, a twisted fragment of enemy hull recovered from the plains. For the Fire Guardian, the child whispered. Mara glanced up at Varys. He lowered his head slowly. Carefully, the child placed the fragment at his claw. Varys did not incinerate it. He did not ignore it. He touched it gently with one talon. The metal glowed faintly, then hardened, reshaped by controlled heat into something smoother. A small, polished disc. He nudged it back toward the child. A gift returned. The child's eyes widened in awe. Around them, coalition members watched openly. No flinching. No retreat. Trust once impossible now stood in sunlight. That evening, as twin moons rose over repaired structures, Mara leaned against Vareth's foreleg. You could leave, she said quietly, you know that. The sky stretched open above them, vast, inviting. He had nothing binding him here. No chains. No control collars. Only choice. His gaze lifted briefly toward the horizon, then lowered again to the encampment, to the people moving below, to the fragile lights of rebuilding civilization. A deep resonance vibrated, not in her bones this time. In the air. A statement. Not alone. She smiled faintly. Yeah, she said, we're not. Days turned to weeks. Enemy remnants did not return. Word spread beyond Kilvaris. A dragon had stood between missiles and refugees. A dragon had chosen restraint over annihilation. A dragon guarded not because he was commanded, but because he believed. And always, beneath his shadow, walked a human who had once stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. The coalition changed. Policy shifted. Interspecies protocols expanded to recognize non-humanoid sentience beyond mere utility. Training simulations incorporated lessons learned from fear overcome. Ylrith began publishing research not on dragon containment, but dragon cooperation. And Mara's. She still walked the perimeter. One dusk, as wind carried the scent of regrowing soil across the plains, she stopped beside Vareth and looked up at him. You know what the historians are going to say, she asked. His eye angled toward her. They'll say the turning point of the war wasn't the last battle. She placed her palm against his scale. It was the moment someone decided you were worth saving. The dragon lowered his head slightly, not bowing. Alignings. The sky above them stretched wide and clear. No missiles. No smoke. Just open air. Vareth unfurled his wings, not in alarm. Not in fury, but in readiness. He launched once more, not to chase enemies, but to circle high above Kilvaris in silent patrol. Below, no one panicked. They watched with pride, because the terrifying dragon was no longer something to fear in the sky. He was the reason the sky felt safe again. And it had begun. With one humans. One choice. One step forward into fire. HFY.